Happy New Year? That's more like it. All right. So it is a Happy New Year. I mean, I always joke that every day I wake up on the right side of the grass is a good day. So I was on the right side this morning, so that's good. I hope you guys had a great Christmas, a good Christmas day, a good Christmas week. I've always kind of liked Christmas week because, no matter kind of what stage of life you're in, whether you're a kid in school, whether you're still working, whether you're retired, whether you get the week off or you still have to kind of go to work, that week still seems to be kind of unique, that we kind of break out of our rigid schedules a little bit. We kind of make a choice to just maybe slow down a little bit, maybe spend time with family or friends that we like, or maybe some we don't like too, I guess. But family or friends, however that works out for you. But it's a chance to just, it's a chance to have, I don't know, just kind of an extended bit of life being a bit more settled. So I hope you had at least a little bit of that this past week. For Bonnie and I, it was actually a really great week. Not bragging, I'm just sharing with you, sort of thing. That Christmas Eve was fantastic. We had a good turnout for Christmas Eve. And then we had a really quiet Christmas day. It was actually really funny on Christmas Day. I forgot to unsilence my phone from the Christmas Eve service. It was fantastic. It was like awesome. I heard from nobody. I'm like, wow, people usually text me like crazy on Christmas. Nobody's texting me today. And I was kind of okay with that, it turns out. But I texted a whole bunch of people the day after Christmas once I realized what happened. And then actually, we had a pretty late schedule, and I did something this week that I have not done in 3.5 years. I went to the movies, like actually went to the movies, like got in a car and drove someplace. Turns out that the last time, I actually looked it up, the last time we went to a movie theater was May 2019. I don't want to tell you what movie it was, but it was a good movie. But this week we went to a movie that's kind of a big deal, which is Avatar. Yeah, and we kind of decided that, although we watch most movies just by streaming, that this was a movie that we thought was worthwhile to kind of go out and see. We'd heard a lot of stuff about the visuals, so we decided we'd go check it out. And it was actually pretty amazing. They did a good job. But I was a little concerned about going. I mean, figure it's taken 13 years to get from the first movie to the second movie. Right? The second movie was first supposed to release in 2016. So, the original movie was 2009. This one was supposed to come out in 2016. Finally came out in 2022. And you always kind of worry, like, are they going to actually premiere something new in this movie? Or are they just going to kind of try to recycle the old stuff? Is this just kind of a money grab sort of thing? But we decided to take a chance. And in my opinion, not that my opinion is worth more than anybody else's, but in my opinion, they did a pretty good job. It was a really kind of enjoyable film that they kept kind of the core elements of the story. They did a good continuation of the story that they had started in the original movie. But they also brought a lot of new stuff. Right, that they really kind of expanded the characters, expanded the story, expanded the scenes, and they really kind of delivered on that promise of these kind of incredible visuals. And it was kind of strange because it actually looked amazingly real, which is kind of nuts when you think about the fact these are 10-foot tall blue people. Like, I don't know what 10-foot tall blue people really look like, but I think they would look something like these people did, I guess. And so we really enjoyed it. But what I found, I think what I think really worked was that it was a continuation of the same story that they had started, but they also evolved, grew, and improved. And it turns out that was a really successful formula for a sequel, because it turns out in the first 14 days they made $1 billion, like with a B, $1 billion. They were only in 2022 for 16 days, and in that 16 days became the second highest grossing film of the year. So they clearly have a successful formula for a film, but I was thinking about that. Continuing to tell the same story while evolving and improving is not just a formula for a good film, a good sequel, it's also kind of a formula for a good life. So today being the first day of the new year, I thought what we could talk about is 2023 going to be a rerun or a premiere? Is it going to be another year that goes on just like all the years before it, or many of the years before it? Or is it going to be a year where things are a bit different somehow? Because I think our natural tendency as we get older, and I think this is throughout all of our lives, our natural tendency is to kind of keep doing the stuff we've done. And there are values to that. You know, we don't want to have to keep reinventing ourselves every year. That wouldn't be healthy. But I think it's also worthwhile to look for opportunities to grow. I think that at every age, at every stage of life, even when things are really, really difficult, I know some of you are in incredibly difficult circumstances right now, there is still an opportunity to grow. I mean, sometimes we grow by doing new things, but sometimes we grow by doing the same old things in new ways. And sometimes we just grow by engaging with those same things in a different way and experiencing them in a different way. So I would like to encourage us as we go into this new year to look for those opportunities to continue your story, because your story is a good story. It's a great story. But there's still a chance to evolve and grow and engage with things differently and to be a fuller version of who you are. So I'd like to ask us all to kind of take a little trip back in time, to just, in your own mind, think back to a time in the past where maybe things were really, really challenging for you, were really, really a struggle for you. One of those situations that kind of replay in your mind on their own all the time. You don't really mean for it to, it just kind of happens. And have you ever looked at that moment in time and said, you know, if I knew then what I know now, that experience would have been incredibly different. Because you know what I would do? I would avoid those mistakes that I made then. You know, or there were opportunities there that I didn't capitalize on, that I would be more capable of capitalizing on now. That if I had the knowledge I have now in that experience then, I wouldn't have the regrets that I have right now. I think most of us have done some of that. Some of us have done a lot of that. I've certainly done that. But as I thought about that, it occurs to me that we don't have to go back in time to have the chance to do things differently. We don't have to go back in time to live differently. Because if we look at our lives, individually look back on our lives, we certainly have mistakes and regrets in our distant past, going way back. You know, maybe when you're young, maybe things happened when you were a kid, maybe things that happened when you were a parent. All these sort of things can be in there. But are all of your mistakes and your regrets in your distant past? Are some of them in your recent past? Some of mine are. And if I look at those mistakes and regrets from my distant past and my recent past, although circumstances may be different, those mistakes and regrets still have a lot in common with one another. And my bet is that each of us will have mistakes and regrets in our future. We certainly will have the opportunity to have mistakes and regrets in our future. And my bet is those future mistakes and regrets are not going to look that different from our past mistakes and regrets. Now, why is that the case? I don't have a magic crystal ball. Not that I believe there's such a thing, but I don't have any kind of magic view into the future. But what I do know is that throughout our lives, we tend to maintain the same mindset. We tend to lock in on a way of thinking. And as a result, we tend to repeat our behaviors. There are certain behaviors that we kind of repeat over and over again, even if we don't really want to. You know, there are so many times you may look at relationships that have gone wrong over your life, and they kind of break down on similar fashions. Or certain difficult experiences at work that, although the specific circumstances were different, there were elements of our handling of it or the way we interacted with people that are really common. And I think there's really a fundamental aspect of that we need to look at our mindset, our behavior, the way we think. Because there's a really well-known phrase. This phrase is, I know it most from the 12-step world, but I don't really know where it originated, which is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. The reality is that many of our lives, I would say most of us have elements of our lives that have a tendency to do that, where we tend to think the same way, act the same way, and still are upset when it ends up the same way. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make me a bad person. It's a simple reality. We fall into grooves of behavior. We get comfortable in those grooves. And as a result, they keep producing the same outcomes over and over. So if we're going to actually have 2023 not be a rerun of the years in the past, if tomorrow's not going to be a rerun of today, then we have to make a choice, right? We have to make a choice to live differently, because if we don't, we will find ourselves in repeated reruns. Now, something that I often mention is that we have a natural thing about human behavior is we kind of tend to wake up and just get through the day, particularly when things are difficult, right? We just kind of see a day as something to get through. And we see particular actions as isolated actions, and we see steps we take as individual steps. But the reality is that each one of those things, the days, the actions, the steps, are not isolated elements. What they are building blocks. Right? Because at the end of your life, at the end of my life, we will have a story that we have written with our lives. And the composition of that story is how we lived each day, the actions that we took, and the steps that we take. So what story do you want to write with your life? What story do I want to write with my life? You know, all of my story has not been a good story. I have not always been the amazing aspect of humanity that I am today. Right? My life was an utter mess, an absolute mess. But you wake up one day and you decide you're going to do a few things a little bit differently. Or maybe you wake up one day and decide you're going to do one thing differently. And then you do another thing differently. And the next thing you know, instead of weighing 300 pounds, you weigh 165 pounds. Right? You wake up every day and you don't have a hangover that you woke up with every other day. You make a decision to do something different. But while you're in it, it can feel so stuck, right? You can feel so stuck because it feels like instead of you writing your story, it feels like your story is writing you, and it's out of control. And when that happens, when the sense of life when we have the sense that life is out of control, things start to feel pointless. They start to feel meaningless. They start to feel hopeless. It can feel like it would all just be better if I just wasn't here. And none of those things are true. None of those things are true. It can feel that way so much, so sometimes. But it can change, but it starts with a decision. It starts with a decision to take control over your life. And the thing is that, you know, it's not this death grip of control. It starts with this kind of recognition that you are worth it. You are valuable enough, that God has made you valuable by your simple creation, which is not simple at all. But the fact that you are alive and you exist and you are a child of God makes you valuable. So my hope is that each of us would kind of take a moment today to recognize that you are important, you are valuable, that God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And it starts with just accepting that and recognizing that and then making a decision to make a difference in our lives. So where's a good place to start? What's kind of the first step in doing something like that? Well, I think that some really good advice comes from the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul, in a letter he was writing to Christians living in Rome during a very, very challenging time, a very difficult time to be a Christian in Rome back in the first century, Paul writes this: "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think." Now, what's interesting is that if we look at that, it's very easy to see that as saying that you need to change who you are. But that's not what Paul's saying. I think Paul is actually saying the exact opposite of that. What Paul is actually pointing out here is he's kind of giving a bit of a warning. He says, you know what? There are going to be influences around you. There will be things that you see. There are going to be things that people say. There are going to be influences in your life. And those things are going to try and change who you are. They're going to try to push you to be someone different than you really are. And that manifests in a lot of different ways. I mean, one of the ways I think in the Western world it manifests is things like working too many hours, just feeling you just have to work and work and work to prove that, you're something or somebody, right? Or maybe it's about buying things that we can't really afford and don't really need, right? But a big part of it can really just be a pressure to live up to expectations, whatever those expectations might be. And it might be real expectations. It might be imagined expectations, right? We worry so much about what people think about us. And honestly, I think we spend a lot of time worrying about what we think people think about us. Because people probably don't think about us as much as we think they do, sort of thing. They're kind of busy in their own lives. But ultimately, that really comes down to chasing things and not being comfortable in yourself because you're trying to adapt to these other influences and these outside ideas. And so Paul is saying, stop letting those things do that to you. Instead, change the way you think. And if we will change the way we think, Paul says that something remarkable will come out of that. Paul says that then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. But basically what Paul is pointing out here is that you are not a mistake. Your natural tendency, your natural way of thinking, your natural behaviors are not a mistake. You were created on purpose, with a purpose. But outside influences are pushing you away from who you really are and pushing you to do things that you don't necessarily want to do. And as long as we're doing that, we're not going to feel good about who we are because we're not being ourselves. And so we're always, of course, going to be uncomfortable because if you're not being yourself, it's like wearing somebody else's clothes that don't fit. You're always going to kind of be dug into your butt a little bit, right? It's always going to itch a little bit. It's always going to feel a little awkward. But when that's all inside of you, that's a little worse than underwear that's too tight, sort of thing, right? So I think the thing that we need to do is that we need to change the way we think about so many things. We need to change the way we think about ourselves. We need to change the way we think about our value. We need to change the way we think about the people around us. We need to be willing to change the way we think about our purpose. And also, I think we need to recognize that God is on our side, that God is on your side. I mean, if you grew up in a church like I grew up in, I was afraid of God all the time because he was just waiting to crush me around every corner, and every mistake I made, he was just waiting for, and he was just keeping this tally list. And that was a God I couldn't believe in. Well, that's cool because it's not a God that exists, right? The real God is for you. I mean, Jesus told us that. Jesus said that if you have seen me, you have seen the Father, which says that when we look at the behavior of Jesus, his loving, accepting behavior, that's the behavior of God. In fact, who were the only people we saw Jesus get mad at? Religious leaders trying to convince people that God was not for them. That was the only people we ever saw Jesus get mad at. So you were created with a purpose, and you were created correctly. So the way to go into this year in a new way is to be willing to be yourself, to be willing to move past those influences that have pushed you away from where you belong. And again, this happens at any age. I made more changes in my 50s than I made in the 50 years before it, sort of thing. And it makes all the difference because you just got to step into who you are. So what do we do then? How do we actually turn this into something practical? How do we actually take a step towards doing this? Well, I think there's a realization that has to happen. That for most of this is going to be hard. It's challenging to change our long-term behaviors, and it's going to take time. And you can't do it by trying to do the whole thing at once. It's got to be something you do incrementally. It's got to be something you do step by step. And I think we all probably have reference points for this. If you have ever tried to change your health, if you've ever tried to lose weight or kind of get in better shape, or you got back pain so you need to walk around a bit more, all those sort of things. If you wake up one day And your solution is, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut my diet down. I'm only going to eat 400 calories a day. You know, I'm going to do cardio for 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'm lifting weights 5 days a week. Does that even last a week? Maybe, and then you're in the hospital the second week sort of thing, right? But what if you do this instead? You say, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by reducing my diet by 300 calories a day. I'm just going to eat 300 calories less than I usually do. And I'm just going to do that for a while. And then you say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a walk for 20 minutes, 3 days a week. And then you do that for a while. You do both for a while. And you just kind of add to that slowly over time. 3 or 4 years later, you're still doing all the old things as well as the new things, and you're starting to get in better shape. I think that's fundamentally how we change any aspect of our lives. Is incremental change done consistently is what actually helps us to be reformed in life, to be more whole in life. But there's a challenge with that. I think for many of us, if we start to take care of ourselves, if we actually start to tend to our emotional needs, we actually feel bad about it. That somehow we've been programmed, and I think this is the outside influences that Paul's talking about, that taking care of ourselves can feel selfish. And I just don't agree with that. I don't think it's wrong to take care of yourselves. I mean, there's that adage that's kind of overused, you know, your air mask first, right? If you're on an airplane and all the cabin pressure goes out, if you start trying to put masks on other people before you put masks on yourself, what's going to happen? You're going to black out and die, right? But if you instead put your mask on first, you can then help other people. The reality is that if you're not healthy, trying to help other people be healthy is going to make you less healthy. And so we have to make that choice. We have to make the choice to recognize that we need to be the person we were created to be. Because the best version of ourselves is not just best for us, it's best for the people around us. It's best for the people whose lives we interact with. Because your story is not just your story, right? Your story intersects with all the stories of all the people in your life. And as your story gets healthier, you can become a healthier part of other people's stories. So as we go into the new year, just a couple things I'd like us just to kind of hang on to. That you are worth making change, and the people in your life are worth making the change to be who you're created to be, to embrace this guidance from Paul. So I think we start by embracing that guidance, by allowing that reality to say that I'm not going to let the things around me pressure me to be someone I am not. And I'm going to do that on purpose. And I'm going to do that by embracing my relationship with God, by talking to God, by seeking God's guidance, and say that, you know, I feel like this isn't me. I feel like what I do each day is not me. God, help me to see what that is. Help me to understand what you're calling me to do. And in that, he will reveal it. And I mentioned this in the last series, but I just want to mention it again, is that a really important part of transforming our lives is recognizing that so much of our difficult behavior, our unhappy behavior, is driven by fear. That fundamentally, much of the negative things that we do come down to fear. I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough money. I'm afraid somebody else is going to get mine. I'm afraid of what someone's going to think about me. We don't always express it in those terms, but fundamentally, it comes down to fear. Almost everything. Fear and worry. So as we go through this process, as we start to try to make these changes, many of us are going to struggle with being afraid of what people are going to think. And we just kind of got to get past that. I mean, a good way to do that is surround yourself with people you trust, people who will be kind to you in your difficulties. Because, you know, some people are not very kind when we struggle. You know, don't let those people in. Right? Keep those people at a distance. Surround yourself by people who really care about you. Because one of the key things that comes from fear is I think we tend to push ourselves too hard. We tend to do things like work too many hours, right? We tend to say yes to things that we didn't really want to say yes to, but what are they going to say about me if I say no? But also the opposite happens. We don't do things we really want to do because I might not do them well. And what are people going to say about me if I don't do it well? We got to get past our fears. And I don't think any of us are immune to that. And I think a key part of experiencing all of this, of being willing to be ourselves, being willing to move past fear, is to do something that is downright un-American. Be content for a minute. To not always hope for more, not always be striving for more, not always wishing I was somewhere else, not always wish I was doing something else, not always wishing I was with someone else or had a different job. Be satisfied with life as it is. And I'll circle back around to kind of, there's a qualifier on that, but be satisfied where you are. And something that was so hard for me for so long, it's still hard for me sometimes, to be in the moment, to stay in the moment. Because I'm always either thinking about the past or thinking about the future, not here right now. And another way to say that, when I say thinking about the past and thinking about the future, what I'm really doing is regretting the past and worrying about the future. Regretting the past and worrying about the future. And as a result, I am never in the moment that I am in. I'm constantly being pulled in a negative direction in one forwards or backwards. Whereas if I would just be here right now, everything's pretty good. I mean, literally for me right now, everything's pretty good. I'm indoors. I'm with people I like, people who are nice to me, who support me. What else could I ask for in this moment? Right? Same sort of thing. This past week when Bonnie and I were home, we're kind of making some transitions in our life, and we were just kind of sitting around the other day playing a game. And historically, I do not think a lot about that game. I'm thinking about all kinds of other things that I should be doing, could be doing, did do, didn't do. And just being present in the moment changes everything, because most of the moments we're in are actually pretty good. But they're hard to stay in them because we're so drawn away by the future and the past. But what I want to kind of qualify, though, is that being content does not mean not achieving things. Being content simply means being content. We still work hard at important things because important things are important. Right? We still work hard at important things. We try to better ourselves. We try to make a difference in other people's lives. But what contentedness does for us is it creates a healthy formula. Because for many of us, when we try to achieve things and we try to do big things, what we're really trying to do is prove we're valuable. That if I could do that thing, it shows I am valuable. If I could do this other thing, it shows that I am valuable. Instead of resting in the fact that you are already valuable as a loved child of God. And what we do is we flip the formula. We don't achieve important things to show that we are valuable. We embrace the fact that we are already valuable, and that gives us the fuel and the energy to do important things. Right? None of this is about sitting home alone going, I'm just awesome and I don't have to do anything. It's about being someone who makes a difference by first being healthy yourself and trusting that you are valuable enough as who you are. You want to improve yourselves in ways that are useful and consistent with who you are, and then use that to make a difference, but never to prove that you're valuable. Because you are already valuable, because God loves you completely, right? There is no future version of you that God is going to love more, because he loves you perfectly right now. And that's a tough one to internalize sometimes. When we think about the things we've done, the mistakes we've made, it can be really hard to believe that God loves us completely. But he does. There's nothing you need to do to change that. So today, as we launch into the new year, as we head out, and kind of Christmas is behind us, to kind of start to get back into a normal life in the next day or two, the question I'd like us each to ask ourselves is that, how do you want to write the next chapter of your story? What do you want this next chapter of your story to be? Do you want it to be a rerun of the years past? Or is there something different you want to do? And what I would encourage each one of us to do, I would really encourage you to do it today if possible, but certainly this week, is sit down and just pick one aspect of your life that you would like to be a little bit different. whatever it is for you. I don't even want to kind of throw a list out there because I don't want to influence what you choose. But one aspect of your life that you would like to be different. And then pick one thing that fits within that aspect of your life and say, for the next 2 months, the only thing I'm going to do is do that one thing consistently. When I get past that 2 months, I'll think about something else, but I'm going to be happy and satisfied that if I do this one thing consistently, that is the only change I'm looking to make for right now. Once that becomes stable, think about another small thing, but start out with that and be patient with yourself. And if you miss a day, don't beat yourself up. Just pick it up again tomorrow. But take your time. It's worth it. No matter where you are in life, no matter what you are dealing with, there is a way to make this year a little bit better than last year. So let's each choose to do that, because you are loved by God and you are part of the family of God. No one is loved by God more than you are.